Welcome to monastic life. This is one of those well thought out BBCs I spent hours on. But basically what happened for this BBC is a woman emailed us who unfortunately I didn't have time to really, I don't think anyone here had time to reply to her too much. So I have been in conversation with her since then. She was working on a school project at a college or something, and she had 3 questions. So I'm in conversation with her about these questions. I told her, I'm just going to do a BBC on the first one. And so, because I thought it fit well. And so her first question was, what is your relationship with consumption? And so consumption in the dictionary means using up of resources. So kind of the question really is, as a monastic, what is your relationship with our use of resources? And in a kind of the bigger picture of using them up, which I think is a very good question. So I thought about this mostly in kind of the more personal level and community level, but there are huge levels to this in terms of our planet and, you know, all kinds of things. And then I'd have to say what came to mind rather quickly to me when I was thinking about this at the community level and how I think about resources is the kind of the framework for this talk is actually going to be the 6 conditions that you need to develop meditative stabilization. Because I always think of those as what I need to work on living here in community. They just match our life so much. More so in retreat, but really all the time. And as we work on those conditions, we will have within the part that we have within ourselves developed so that we can cultivate our spiritual qualities. So I'm doing this talk with that a little bit as a framework. So of course we have bodily needs, and as monastics, those kind of fall into 4 areas of the 4 requisites, where we need food, we need shelter, we need clothing, we need medicine. But you know, as a monastic, we don't physically need much more than that, physically speaking. I mean, that kind of covers it. So when you go in Safeway and they have the whole long aisle of pet foods and pet kitty litter, another aisle for kitty litter, and another whole aisle for shampoos. You know, like so many that you can't, or toothpaste, you can't actually find what you're looking for because there are like 100 choices or 50 choices. It's a little crazy. So for us as monastics, we don't need that. We don't need 50 to 30 to 100 choices for how we brush our teeth. We might need 3 or 4 choices, I don't know. So, you know, one thing is to think about our relationship with the resources in that regard, as our life is one more of simplicity. And that fits in a little bit to when you talk about the conditions that we need. You need a favorable environment. And if you think about that just in terms of, like, one of these 6 conditions is for meditative serenity is dwelling in an appropriate area, favorable environment. We create our environment to a degree. I mean, of course, there's the external part of it, but I'm here talking about our resources. So I'm talking about what we're doing internally. So we don't need to go shopping that much. We don't need to drive our cars that much. All those kind of things. We do need the environment. We do need shelter, but we don't need to follow all the magazine ads about how we go about that. Yeah, so I think that in terms of the second area, also in terms of our environment, we avoid music. So we don't need to buy a bunch of MP3 players and CDs and everything in that department. We don't need the latest gadget. We aren't involved with entertainment. So on a lot of things that use resources, we're kind of checked out of. We don't need them. We do need aspects of these things at this day and age, but we don't need all of it. We do need good companions, and that is what we do to, you know, to make ourselves into good companions. Part of that has to do with people who hold similar views. And I remember when Venerable, we have a few instances of people here who have been in intentional communities that didn't work. As monastics, we have the 6 harmonies, which maybe we'll touch on in this. But basically, you know, you do have to have a lot of things in common to function as a monastic community. And part of that is how we relate to our resources. So we have a lot of precepts around our resources and how we handle that in our relationships with lay people. So these are all part of our relationship with resources. Similar practice when they talk about the environment, I think of that they talk about it in terms of the 3 doors of body, speech, and mind. So with our body, we are not off driving out every whim down the road using gasoline to go here and there and to go cruising to work with our minds because we like driving in the country to calm down. That's most of us. We're trying to avoid a lot of purposeless speech around worldly affairs. It doesn't mean we aren't interested in worldly affairs. It doesn't mean we aren't informed about worldly affairs, but we have a purpose to our speech. So, and then in terms of the mental part, these come in the next part. So I'm going to combine now the second, third, and sixth of these 6 conditions. And the second one is having little desire. The third is being content. And the 6th is completely ridding thoughts of desire. These are conditions that we need in order to develop meditative stability, or you're just going to sit there and be distracted to one pleasure or another, or one problem or another, or one thing or another. So even when we're not in retreat, even when we aren't focusing in our retreat on shamatha, we do want to work on this part of ourselves that can be content, that can be reducing our desires and giving up thoughts of desires for sensual objects. And so, especially for a monastic, because that's her question, like how does a monastic relate to resources? Well, we're not just thinking about this life. We're thinking about future lives, and we're thinking about our spiritual aspirations. So right there, we're putting ourselves in a different relationship to a lot of these things around us. So it's helpful for us internally to develop a mind of contentment, being satisfied with what we have. We do have to have a certain level of kind of all of these things to sustain life, but we don't need to have all of the things that are out there. And we can learn to, we can learn to be satisfied that this is enough. We don't have to have a mind that's always looking for the next thing. I remember when John Pell lived here, he and I used to talk about our afflictions, and he talked about, I said, well, I'm learning about anger, and you're learning about attachment, and maybe we'll be able to teach each other. And he used to tell me what it was like for him to make a cup of tea. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is why I don't drink tea. It's like, the mind of attachment can get attached to anything. And so then you're never satisfied. Like, he was never satisfied with his cup of tea. This is like the mind that we want to work to dispel, like the perfect cup of tea. Really? I don't think we need that. Okay, so that's a little something about that. So, because that's a mind that's just fantasizing about something that's never really going to be content. We have a worldview of samsara is related to dukkha. We are not going to be satisfied. So to have a realistic expectation of what these resources can offer us, that's the wisdom part of our path, is to put ourselves in a right relationship with these resources through our ethics and wisdom, I think, primarily. So you do want to, one thing Jin Lamrimpa wrote about when he talks about these 6 conditions, he talked about discontent comes into sharp focus when you think this is not satisfactory. So don't you notice that? It comes into sharp focus. Yes, this is exactly what our mind is. We have single-pointed concentration on our dissatisfactions. And the antidote to that is to say, this suffices. This is good enough. And we learn how to work with that mind. And another thing he says, which is more to do with the shamatha part, which I had read before but I had forgotten, and I find so interesting, is that when you develop shamatha, you're going to reach a level where you reach the first dhyana, which is the form realm. The form realm is not the desire realm, right? So if you're spending your life chasing around things in the desire realm, how are you going to get out of it? How are you going to get to that form realm if you're sitting on the cushion thinking about, wow, I want to download XYZ or whatever it is, It's just not going to happen. It's like these things are internally inconsistent. So I think he makes a good point there, which is part of our wisdom side in working with these things. Okay, the fourth of those 6 things is rejecting a multitude of activities. And here, particularly speaking of retreat, but also just monastics in general, we are not business people. We aren't involved in business. Yes, we have things that we do, but we aren't running businesses. We are not what was our latest thing around this? We are not a TV station. We are not what was it when we were talking about our video team here? But, we are not a production studio. We do a lot of videos that we put online. We definitely do that. But we are not a TV station. We are not a business. We are not a production studio. And at that same time, in a realistic way, we want to provide things so people can connect with the Dharma. So that's where we need to have some wisdom and see what we can do that doesn't interfere with our bigger picture. And what we need to do to make that to make the part where we're connecting with people with the Dharma, make it happen. We definitely need to do that. And of course, in terms of rejecting a multitude of activities, during retreat, especially, we limit our contact with others. We don't do a lot of social activities. And as monastics, there's a lot of things like that that we don't do anyway. We don't go into bars. We don't go to parties, sports events, political rallies, a lot of things. We're saving all that gasoline. And we're protecting our minds, right? Okay, now the last one that I haven't spoken of yet, which I think is really important and really needs a lot more said about it, is maintaining our ethical discipline. In order to develop shamatha, we need to have ethical discipline. You know what it's like when you go against your sense of personal integrity. And you sit there on the cushion and you're just kind of fry. It's not your mind is taken away from really what you want to be doing because you've got to deal now with your behaviors or your speech or your things where your ethics didn't live up to our own ethical wishes and aspirations. Of course, we don't, we're not perfect beings, but as monastics, we have a lot of focus in our lives on avoiding harm and protecting life and protecting others. And part of protecting the opposite of not stealing is to protect people's property. In a larger sense, I think Thich Nhat Hanh had this right. I really resonated with this because we have precepts around a lot of these things. And the way he encapsulated our precepts of non-harm had to do both with killing and stealing, I think both. Not just with people, not just with animals, but he took it all the way down to minerals. And think about that. If we had concern for all the way down to minerals, we wouldn't probably have strip mining. We wouldn't have the problem we have with, I really recently talked to our Department of Health there, the water system people, because we've had this grant. And after we got done with the business, I again thank them for what they're doing. And I appreciate that we have the laws that we have in this state, because in some states, like Arizona, they're draining people's wells so that people can grow carrots in the desert. And farmers and the residents who have been there for centuries and decades, they're having to drill their wells deeper like every 5 years. And when I thanked them, and I mentioned this for the second time to them, the person at the Department of Health said, yes, there's a lot of people who think of these resources as commodities to be exploited. This is the ethics part relating to our resources. This is not our relationship with Mother Earth, let's say it that way. Think of Mother Earth as a being. Would you treat any other being this way? No, we wouldn't. And so we need to think about this at many levels, from the personal, the internal, to the community, to our cities, to our countries, to our whole world in terms of our ethics around resources. So I think that, this is a good framework in my mind for looking at this topic, and hopefully that answers the question from one perspective. There's a lot that could be said.